The emergency lights painted Viridian Station in strokes of bleeding crimson. Corporal Ilara Vasquez pressed her back against the shattered viewport, her breath fogging the inside of her cracked helmet. Outside, the stars were wrong, twisted by the gravitational wake of a Creel dreadnought that had materialized from slipspace without warning. 6 hours ago, this had been a supply depot. 3 hours ago, it had been a slaughterhouse.
Now at Aero 347 station time, it was a tomb. Her hand shook.
Not from fear, though fear was there, cold and gnawing in her gut, but from the cold. Atmospheric processors had failed 2 hours into the attack. The temperature had dropped to -15 Celsius. Bodies of her fellow soldiers lay scattered across the cargo bay like discarded dolls, their blood frozen in blackened streaks across the deck plating. Ilara was a logistics officer. She moved boxes. She signed manifests. She once calculated the optimal protein bar distribution for a 3-month siege and received a commendation for efficiency. She had never fired a weapon in anger before today. Today, she had fired 67 times where her rifle clicked empty. Again. She tossed it aside and pressed her palm against the wound in her side, a graze from a plasma bolt that had melted through her armor's left flank. The pain was a distant pulsing thing like a second heartbeat she couldn't shut off. "Last human," a voice rasped from the corridor, not through a translator. The Creel spoke Galactic Standard with the same ease they spoke with their teeth. "Come out. We promise fast." Ilara didn't move. Her mind, trained for inventory and supply chains, ran the numbers against her will. Initial garrison, 243 soldiers, 31 civilian contractors, 14 station crew. Current confirmed survivors on her tactical display. 1, herself. The evacuation transports had launched 40 minutes ago. She had watched the third one, the one carrying the children, the one she had personally loaded with emergency rations, explode when a Creel frigate rammed it mid-boost. There had been no debris. Only light, then nothing. That was when her rifle had clicked empty the first time. That was when she had picked up the blade. It lay beside her now, still wet. A standard issue Mark 7 combat knife, 17 centimeters of carbon steel alloy. Edge retention rated for 47 consecutive strikes before dulling. She had found it in the chest of Private Thomas Reyes, who had died pulling her behind a supply crate during the first wave. He had been 19 years old. He had called her Mama Vasquez because she nagged him about his protein intake. The Creel in the corridor stepped into view. 3 of them, 7 feet tall, scales the color of dried blood, eyes like shattered amber. Their armor was ceremonial, bronze and bone, because the Creel had never lost a ground engagement in their recorded history. 2,000 years of conquest, 300 subjugated species, not one battlefield defeat. The lead Creel tilted its head, regarding her like a curiosity. "You, the one with the numbers. Where is your weapon?" Ilara looked at the blade in her hand. Then she looked at the Creel commander standing behind its soldiers. A massive thing with scars crossing its snout like battle maps. The commander had been laughing when it stepped over Private Reyes's body. She remembered the laugh. It had sounded like stones grinding together. "I don't need a weapon," Ilara said. She threw the blade. It wasn't a trained throw. It wasn't graceful. It was the desperate, unhinged toss of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The knife spun twice and buried itself in the throat of the left soldier before it could raise its shield. The other 2 lunged. Ilara didn't retreat. She stepped forward, into the space between their strikes, and caught the wrist of the right soldier as its clawed hand descended. She twisted, not with strength, but with geometry. The joint hyperextended. The creature roared. She ripped the blade from its dead comrade's throat and drove it into the second soldier's eye socket in the same motion. The third scrambled backward. The commander stopped. Laughing, Ilara stood in the spray of black. Arterial blood, her face unrecognizable beneath the gore, her wounded side screaming, her vision tunneling. She pulled the blade free and pointed it at the Creel commander. "You should have taken the fast transport," she whispered. The commander raised its plasma caster. Ilara moved. Not fast, she was too injured for fast. But she moved correctly. A quarter step left as the commander fired. The plasma bolt melted the crate behind her. She closed the distance in the heartbeat of its recharge cycle and drove the blade up, under the chin where the scales thinned. The blade didn't miss. The commander's eyes went wide. It tried to speak. Only a wet clicking sound came out. Then it crumpled. Alara stood over the body, breathing in ragged gasps, the knife still lodged in its throat. The station's emergency sirens had stopped. The only sound was her own heartbeat and the distant crackle of fires. She pulled the blade free and looked toward the docking bay where the last Creel dropship was powering its engines. They had seen. They had recorded. They were fleeing. For the first time in Creel history, their soldiers ran from a single human. Alara didn't cheer. She didn't cry. She walked back to where Private Reyes lay, sat down beside him, and placed the blade across her knees. In the silence of Viridian Station, surrounded by 242 dead, Alara Vasquez closed her eyes and listened to the Creel ships burn atmosphere to escape. By morning, the galaxy would know her face. By nightfall, the Creel would invent a new word for fear. They would not speak her name aloud for 3 years. In the darkness of the cargo bay, Alara's helmet comm crackled to life, a faint, distorted signal from the Creel flagship. A voice trembling said, "The one who counts. She is counting still." 3 years later, on the fringe world of Tethys 9, Alara Vasquez killed a man with a spoon. It wasn't intentional. She had been eating ration stew in a cantina that smelled of recycled air, and regret when a bounty hunter from the Gladius Syndicate recognized her scarred left hand. He drew a needler. She threw the spoon. It hit his trachea. He died choking on a mouthful of ceramic. She finished her stew, paid the bartender with the dead man's credit chip, and walked into the acid rain without looking back. This was her life now. Tethys 9 was a garbage world, literally. A planet-sized landfill for 3 corporate sectors. Its surface was a maze of rusted wrecks and abandoned processing plants. The rain fell at a 45-degree angle, sharp as needles, and the air tasted like copper and failure. Perfect for someone who wanted to disappear. Alara lived in the husk of a crashed cargo hauler, 100 clicks from the nearest settlement. She had no furniture, no entertainment, no company except the ghosts. She woke before dawn each day, ran 12 kilometers through the acidic mud, practiced knife forms for 2 hours and spent the remaining daylight staring at the wall. The blade from Viridian Station hung on a hook above her sleeping bag. She hadn't touched it in 18 months. She didn't need to. It lived in her dreams. 312, the dreams whispered. 312 bodies, and you are the one who walked away. She never counted the Creel she had killed that night. Others did. The galactic news networks ran the number. 47 confirmed kills, single combat, unassisted. The highest kill count of any human soldier in a single engagement since the first expansion war. The Creel offered a bounty of 50 million credits, dead or alive. Though alive meant public execution, no one had collected. 18 assassins had tried in the first year. 3 more in the second. 1 fool in the third. All of them had failed. The Bounty Hunters Guild had quietly stopped taking the contract. Not because Alara was too dangerous, because the silence was too terrifying. She killed without boasting, without threatening, without enjoying it. She killed like someone filing paperwork, efficient, necessary, and utterly devoid of emotion. That was what frightened them. On the 1097th day of her exile, a young Creel warrior named Vrek landed a rust bucket shuttle on Tethys 9's sole landing pad. He was 23 years old, the son of the commander Alara had killed on Viridian Station. He had watched the battle recordings 1,000 times. He had memorized every frame, every breath, every impossible angle of her blade. He did not come for revenge. He came to understand. Vrek tracked her for 3 weeks without making contact. He watched from the shadows of crashed freighters as she hunted. A pirate gang had set up an outpost 80 clicks from her home. 37 heavily armed scavengers who had been raiding settlements for months. The local militia couldn't touch them. The corporations didn't care. Alara dismantled them in 6 hours. She used a broken shuttle door as a shield. She used the acid rain to blind their sensors. She used 3 kitchen knives she had sharpened against a rock. And when those broke, she used a piece of rebar. She moved through their compound like a ghost with a grudge. And when the last pirate tried to run, she caught him by the ankle and asked a single question. "Where did you hide the children?" Vrek watched from a rooftop, his reptilian heart hammering against his ribs. He had trained his entire life for combat. He had sparred with champions. He had studied every known martial art in the galaxy, and he realized with cold, humiliating clarity that he could not have survived 5 minutes against this woman. She wasn't a warrior. Warriors had honor, rules, patterns. Ilara Vasquez had none of those things. She moved like someone who had never been trained because she hadn't. She had learned to fight in a single night, surrounded by the bodies of her friends. And every movement since then had been improvisation perfected through repetition. She was an accountant. She had calculated the probability of her survival on Viridian Station and found it unacceptable. So she had simply refused to die. Rek descended from the rooftop as she bandaged a gash on her forearm. She saw him coming. She always saw everything, and her hand drifted toward the rebar. "I am not here to fight," Rek said, raising his empty hands. His galactic standard was accented but clear. "I am here to learn." Ilara studied him for a long moment. Her eyes were the color of old bruises. There was no recognition in them. Not of his species, not of his lineage, not of the fact that she had killed his father. "Learn what?" she asked. Vrek knelt in the acid mud, an act of submission no Creel had ever offered a human. "How to be afraid," he said, "and how to fight anyway." Ilara's expression didn't change, but her hand moved away from the rebar. "You'll regret this," she said. "I already do," Vrek admitted. She almost smiled. It was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. That night, as Rek sat across from her in the wrecked cargo hauler, Ilara picked up the blade from Viridian Station for the first time in 18 months. She turned it over in her scarred hands and said, "Your father asked me where my weapon was." He didn't understand. The weapon was never the knife. The weapon was the moment I stopped being afraid to die. She met his eyes. "You want to learn fear? Stay alive long enough to watch me teach it." The message arrived 3 days later, routed through 17 quantum-entangled relays to mask its origin. Ilara watched it on a cracked datapad while Vrek cooked ration paste over a chemical fire. The speaker was Admiral Kane of the United Human Fleet, a man she had met once briefly at a logistics conference where he had called her excess personnel to her face. His expression now was pale, tight, the look of a man swallowing glass. "Corporal Vasquez," Kane began. "No rank promotion, no acknowledgement of what she had done. The Creel High Command has offered terms. A full ceasefire in exchange for one condition, your extradition to their homeworld. They have promised to spare 3 human colony worlds, New Carthage, Redemption, and Horizon, if you are delivered within 72 hours. The datapad trembled in her grip. "The Senate is voting now," Caney continued. "I won't lie to you. The vote is not in your favor. We are stretched thin. The Creel have broken our supply lines. We cannot defend those worlds. The choice is between 1 life and 3 million. He paused. For a single frame, his professional mask cracked, and Ilara saw something raw beneath. Shame, perhaps, or anger. "If you are watching this, I'm sorry. That is worth nothing. But I am sorry." The message ended. Rex stared at her, his amber eyes unblinking. "You knew they would betray you?" "I knew they were politicians," Ilara said. She set down the datapad and picked up her blade. The edge caught the chemical firelight, throwing distorted shadows across the rusted walls. "There's a difference," she stood. Walked to the crashed hauler's communications array, a jury-rigged mess of salvaged parts and prayer. Her fingers moved across the console, patching through to the Creel flagship's open channel. No encryption, no subtlety. She wanted everyone to hear. "The one who counts," a Creel voice answered, trembling despite its attempt at authority. "You have received the terms?" "I have a counteroffer," Ilara said. Silence. "You wanted me," she continued, her voice flat and steady. "You said come to your homeworld. Fine, I'm coming. But not in chains. Not as a prisoner. I'm landing my ship on your sacred battle plane in 12 hours. I'll be alone. I'll be unarmed except for one blade. And if you want me, you'll have to take me." The Creel commander laughed, a brittle, uncertain sound. "You would walk into the heart of our species? Surrounded by our legions? You are insane." "No," Ilara said. "I'm an accountant. I've run the numbers. You want me dead so badly you'll accept any chance to make it happen. That's your weakness. You can't resist an open target." She cut the channel. Rek was on his feet, his scales pale with something that looked like fear. "You cannot do this. They will send 100, 1,000. You will die?" "Probably," Ilara agreed. She began packing her meager belongings into a canvas bag. "But they won't forget me, and neither will your people. My people want your head on a pike. Then they'll have to work for it. She walked to the crashed hauler's exit and paused, looking back at Rek. The young Creel was shaking, not from cold, but from a terror he couldn't name. She had seen that look before. On Viridian Station, in the eyes of soldiers who knew they were about to die. You wanted to learn fear, she said. Stay here. Watch the broadcast. When it's over, you'll understand. She stepped into the acid rain and didn't look back. The Creel homeworld. Krellis Prime was a planet of obsidian plains and volcanic mountains. Its sky perpetually stained orange by sulfurous clouds. The sacred battle plain of Tharvok stretched for 50 kilometers in every direction. Flat, featureless, and stained black by centuries of blood. No outsider had ever set foot on it. No outsider had ever been invited. Alara landed her stolen shuttle at its exact center. She wore no armor. No helmet. No weapons except the blade from Viridian Station strapped to her thigh. Her hands were bare. Her face was uncovered. The acid rain of Tethys 9 had left permanent scars across her cheeks, silver lines that caught the orange light like cracks in porcelain. The Creel legions assembled around her in perfect silence. 50,000 warriors, their armor gleaming, their weapons charged, their eyes burning with centuries of unbroken pride. Behind them, the Creel High Command watched from a floating platform. 12 elders in ceremonial robes, their scaled faces unreadable, and behind them, broadcasting to every screen in the galaxy, 1,000 camera drones captured every breath. Alara walked to the center of the plane. She stopped. She knelt and she closed her eyes. The Creel commanders exchanged glances. This was not how the ritual worked. The condemned were supposed to beg, to scream, to run. The plane demanded desperation. It fed on fear. Ilara Vasquez simply waited. The High Command's lead elder rose from his throne. His voice echoed across the plain, amplified by hidden speakers. The one who counts. You have come to die. Do you have final words? Ilara opened her eyes. She looked past the legions, past the elders, past the cameras, and smiled. I'm not here to die, she said. I'm here to show your children what happens when you mistake mercy for weakness. She stood. The legions tensed. The lead elder raised his hand. Send the 100, he commanded. Let the champions feast. 100 Creel warriors, the best of their species, undefeated in single combat, stepped forward from the ranks. The blade came free. The first champion charged. Ilara didn't move, didn't flinch. She waited until its claws were centimeters from her throat and whispered something the cameras couldn't catch. The champion froze. Its eyes went wide. And then Ilara moved and the blade sang, and the galaxy learned what terror truly meant. The first champion died before it hit the ground. Ilara didn't waste motion. She didn't parry, she redirected. The champion's own momentum carried its throat onto her blade, and she stepped around the collapsing body like a dancer avoiding a falling partner. The second champion barely had time to blink before she was inside its guard, her left hand catching its wrist, her blade punching up through its jaw. 2 seconds. 2 kills. The remaining 98 champions hesitated. That was their mistake. Ilara moved into the hesitation like a wolf into a flock. She didn't fight fair. Fair was for people who hadn't watched children die in exploding transports. She threw dirt into eyes. She kicked knees backward. She used dead bodies as shields and dying screams as distractions. Every move was a trap. Every feint a lie. Every strike an inevitability. The Creel had studied her battle recordings. They had analyzed her patterns, her rhythms, her weaknesses. They had prepared for a fighter. They had not prepared for an accountant. Ilara didn't fight like a warrior. She fought like someone who had calculated the exact angle of every joint, the tensile strength of every tendon, the precise amount of force required to separate scale from flesh. She didn't aim for the heart, too protected. She aimed for the spaces between armor plates, the gaps in their guard, the split second of confusion when a champion realized its partner had just died. 10 kills. 20. The plane grew slick with blood. The orange sky reflected off the black obsidian like a mirror of hell. Creel spectators, millions of them watching from floating platforms and orbital screens, began to scream, not in triumph, but in horror. 50 kills. The champions broke formation. They had never broken formation. Their entire military doctrine was built on the unshakable certainty of victory. But the woman in the center of the plane was still moving, still killing, still counting in that cold, distant way that made her seem less like a soldier and more like a natural disaster. 60 kills. Vrek watched from his hidden vantage point on the eastern ridge, his claws digging furrows into the obsidian. He had seen the recordings. He had tracked her for weeks. He had thought he understood. He understood nothing. Ilara Vasquez was not fighting. She was teaching. Every kill was a lesson in humility. Every body was a textbook page. She was showing the Creel, showing the galaxy, that their invincibility had always been an illusion, propped up by weak enemies and weaker consciences. 70 kills. The champions tried to retreat. The High Command, panicking, ordered them to hold. The champions tried to surround her. She broke their encirclement by charging directly through the weakest point. Not the strongest, not the fastest, but the afraid. The one who flinched, 80 kills, the blade was still sharp. It should have dulled 20 champions ago. But Ilara had learned on Viridian Station that fear kept an edge better than any whetstone. She wasn't cutting scale. She was cutting morale, 90 kills. The last 10 champions threw down their weapons. Not surrendered. Threw, as in, fled, as in, ran screaming across the sacred battle plane of Tharvok with 50 million of their ancestors watching. The Creel High Command sat frozen on their floating platform. The lead elder's mouth hung open, his forked tongue limp. The camera drones panned across the carnage. 97 bodies arranged in a loose spiral around a single, blood-soaked figure. Ilara Vasquez stood in the center of that spiral. Breathing hard, her blade dripping, her face utterly blank. She looked up at the drones. She looked through them, at the Senate on Earth, at the bounty hunters on Tethys 9, at every human who had ever called her a monster. And she spoke. No more. Her voice was quiet. It didn't need to be loud. The entire galaxy heard it. She turned her back on the remaining champions, walked to the center of the plane, and sat down cross-legged in the blood. She laid the blade across her knees. She closed her eyes. The cameras kept rolling. The Creel legions did not move, did not breathe, did not dare. For 97 seconds, the most powerful military force in the galaxy stood paralyzed by a single sitting woman. Then the lead elder found his voice. Take her into custody. No one moved. Take her. A single soldier stepped forward. Then another. Then 100. They approached her with the careful terror of men approaching a sleeping predator. Ilara didn't resist when they lifted her. Didn't open her eyes. Didn't speak. But as they carried her away from the plane, past the bodies of their greatest champions, past the shattered pride of their species, she whispered something that the nearest soldier caught. You shouldn't have made me count. The soldier dropped her. Ilara hit the obsidian hard, her wounded side finally giving way, and for the first time in 3 years, she screamed. The hook. Vrek was the first to reach her. He pushed through the stunned legions and knelt beside her broken body, his hands hovering uselessly over wounds he couldn't heal. Ilara grabbed his wrist with a strength that shouldn't have existed. The footage, she gasped. Send it everywhere, let them see. Her eyes fluttered. Let them see what happens when you push an accountant past her limit. Then she went still, and Vrek screamed for a medic, and somewhere in the depths of Creel space, a civil war began to brew. She woke in chains, not metaphorical chains, actual, physical restraints bolted to a medical bed in a Creel military hospital. Her wrists were cuffed, her ankles strapped, her chest wrapped in bandages that smelled of antiseptic and something alien. The ceiling above her was black obsidian, carved with ancient runes she couldn't read. She didn't try to move. She had learned 3 years ago that the first rule of survival was knowing when to lie still. A Creel medic entered, smaller than the warriors, with softer scales and gentler eyes. It checked her vitals without speaking, adjusted her IV, and left. Ilara watched it go, counting the seconds. 147 until the next medic entered. 211 until a guard changed. 304 until someone brought food. She cataloged everything. The exits. The blind spots. The pressure points in the restraints. Old habits. Vrek came on the 3rd day. He looked different, older, harder, his scales dulled by stress and sleeplessness. He sat beside her bed and stared at the wall. The Creel are fighting each other, he said. The elders blame the military. The military blames the elders. The common warriors blame everyone. They watched you kill 97 champions. They watched the rest run. They cannot accept what they saw, so they are destroying themselves trying to explain it. Ilara said nothing. I sent the footage, Freck continued, like you asked. Every network, every species. The humans have declared you a living saint. The Senate that voted to surrender you is holding emergency sessions. 2 of the 3 colony worlds you saved have renamed cities after you. He paused. The 3rd named a warship after you. The Ilara's Revenge. It's already killed 11 Creel vessels. Ilara closed her eyes. Does that not please you? Freck asked. Does it look like I'm pleased? He had no answer for that. The next 3 months were the hardest of her life, and she had survived Viridian Station. The physical wounds healed. Creel medicine was advanced. Within 6 weeks, her ribs had knitted. Her internal bleeding had stopped, and the scar tissue across her torso had settled into a roadmap of healed trauma. The Creel released her from the hospital and confined her to a single room in the High Command's compound. Comfortable, even luxurious, but still a cage. The mental wounds festered. She stopped sleeping. When she did sleep, she dreamed of Viridian Station. Not the battle, but the aftermath. Walking through the cargo bay, counting the bodies, stepping over Thomas Reyes's frozen face. In the dreams, she always reached the end of the bay and found one more body. Her own. She stopped eating. The food was good. Creel chefs prepared human-compatible meals trying to win her favor. But every bite tasted like ash. She dropped 10 kilos in a month. Then 15. The medics force-fed her nutrient paste. She threw it up. She stopped speaking. Freck visited every day, bringing news of the galaxy, of the Civil War, of the humans who worshipped her and the Creel who feared her. She listened without responding. Words felt like violence now. Every syllable was a blade she didn't want to wield anymore. On the 67th day of her confinement, she asked for a mirror. The Creel gave her one, a polished obsidian slab reflective as black glass. She looked at her face for the first time since Viridian Station. A stranger looked back. The silver scars on her cheeks, the hollow eyes, the gaunt cheeks, the hair that had gone white at the temples, though she was only 26. She looked like a ghost. She looked like a monument. She looked like nothing human at all. She put down the mirror and didn't pick it up again. On the 93rd day, she wrote in her journal. She hadn't kept a journal since the academy. Now she wrote obsessively, filling page after page with cramped, frantic handwriting. She wrote about Viridian Station, every name, every face, every scream she had memorized. She wrote about the blade, the weight of it, the balance, the way it felt to drive through scale and cartilage and bone. She wrote about the children on the transport, the ones she hadn't saved, the ones whose names she would never know. Heroes don't dream of screaming, she wrote. Heroes don't wake up reaching for a knife that isn't there. Heroes don't count bodies instead of sheep. I am not a hero. I am a woman who learned the wrong lesson on the worst night of her life. I learned that violence works. I learned that fear is a weapon. I learned that the only way to survive is to become something that other people fear more than they fear death. And now I don't know how to be anything else. She tore out the page, crumpled it, and ate it. The Creel guards watched through the observation window. They did not intervene. They were afraid of her, even now, even starving, even broken. That was the worst part. They were still afraid. On the 94th day, a new message arrived. Not from the Senate, not from the Creel, but from a child. A 12-year-old girl named Mira, one of the survivors of New Carthage, the colony Ilara had saved. The message was short, recorded on a cheap data pad, and it cut through Ilara's silence like a blade. Miss Vasquez, I don't know if you'll see this, but my mom says you're a hero. I think you're just sad. When I'm sad, I remember that someone out there is counting on me to be brave. I hope you have someone counting on you too. Please don't give up. Ilara watched the message 17 times. Then she stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. The guards flinched. Get wreck, she said. Her voice cracked from disuse. I need to make a call. The Xylos hive emerged from the void between galaxies with no warning and no mercy. They were not a species in the traditional sense. They were a psychic swarm, a collective consciousness that consumed biomass and converted it into more of itself. Worlds that fell to the Xylos didn't just die. They were digested. Every mind, every memory, every scream added to the hive's infinite hunger. The outer colonies fell in 3 days. The inner colonies in 2 weeks. The Creel, fractured by civil war, lost 7 worlds before they could organize a response. Their weapons did nothing. Plasma bolts passed through the Hive's drones like light through smoke, and psychic attacks rebounded against a consciousness too vast to wound. For the first time in their history, the Creel faced an enemy they could not fight. For the first time in their history, they asked for help. Breck carried the request. He had been promoted, or demoted depending on perspective, to emissary of the fractured clans, a title that meant nothing and everything. He traveled to Earth under a white flag, stood before the United Human Senate and spoke the words no Creel had ever spoken. We cannot win. You cannot win. Alone we die. Together we might survive. The Senate debated for 3 hours. Then they asked the question Rek had been dreading. Where is Ilara Vasquez? She was in a cargo container, not the one on Tethys 9, a new one parked in a human military depot on Mars. She had requested it specifically. No windows, no furniture, no distractions. Just 4 metal walls and a single blade, the blade from Viridian Station. She had been inside for 3 weeks. The medics checked on her twice a day. She ate when they left food. She slept when exhaustion overcame her. She didn't speak. She didn't leave. The galaxy called her a hero. The Creel called her the one who counts. The Xylos Hive, if it knew she existed, probably didn't call her anything at all. She preferred that. Breck knelt outside her container for 6 hours before she opened the door. He looked terrible. Thinner than she remembered. His scales peeling from stress, his eyes red-rimmed and desperate. When he spoke, his voice was raw. You taught us fear. Now teach us how to fight something worse. Ilara stared at him. Her white hair hung in tangled ropes around her hollow face. Her hands resting on her knees were steady. The Xylos don't feel fear, she said. I know. They don't have throats to cut. No, they're not like the Creel. They're not like anything I've ever fought. Freck lowered his head. I know. Silence. The Martian wind howled outside the depot, carrying red dust against the container walls. Ilara looked past Rek, at the distant lights of the human fleet preparing for a war they couldn't win. Then she thought of a 12-year-old girl's message. Someone out there is counting on me to be brave. She reached back into the container and picked up the blade. One more dance, she said. Rek looked up. His eyes widened. You'll come? I'll come. She stepped out of the container, barefoot on the cold metal floor. But not as a soldier, not as a weapon. I can't be that anymore. I won't. Then what will you be? Ilara tested the blade's edge against her thumb. A bead of blood welled up dark against her pale skin. A teacher, she said. You wanted to learn fear. I'll teach you that. And then I'll teach you how to make the Xylos feel it. The joint human Creel fleet assembled at the edge of the Xylos Hive's territory, 140 warships, the largest alliance in galactic history. The Creel provided the firepower. The humans provided the strategy. Ilara provided something neither side had expected. Hope. She trained them. Not in combat, there was no time for that, but in mindset. She gathered the commanders in a briefing room, projected the Hive's known data on the wall, and spoke for 3 hours without notes. The Xylos feed on fear. That's their strength. But fear is also their weakness. They've never faced an enemy who doesn't run. They've never faced soldiers who've already survived their worst day. She pointed at the Creel commanders. You thought you were invincible. I showed you otherwise. That pain you felt? That humiliation? That's your weapon now. You know what it's like to lose. You know what it's like to be afraid. Use it, she pointed at the human commanders. You think I'm special. I'm not. I was a logistics officer. I moved boxes. The only difference between me and you is that I stopped caring whether I lived or died. That's not bravery. That's math. And you can all do math. She turned to the holographic map of the Hive's territory. A single red dot marked their objective, the Hive's core, a planet-sized brain that directed the swarm. We go there, Ilara said. We cut off the head. The body dies, a Creel general spoke up. The Hive will send everything it has to stop us. Millions of drones, psychic attacks that will shatter our minds. Good, Ilara said. Let them come. While they're focused on us, the civilians evacuate. And while they're focused on the civilians, we slip through. And if we fail? Ilara looked at the blade strapped to her thigh. The same blade, the only blade, then we don't. As the fleet prepared to jump, Rek found Ilara alone in her quarters, staring at a picture of Private Thomas Reyes, the 19-year-old who had died pulling her behind a crate. She touched the picture with trembling fingers. "I promised his mother I'd bring him home," she whispered. "I broke that promise. I won't break another." She strapped on the blade and walked to the airlock. Behind her, Rek saw something he had never seen before. Ilara Vasquez, the woman who had killed 97 champions, was crying. And she was smiling. The final battle lasted 17 hours. The Xylos hive knew they were coming. Of course it knew. Every mind it had consumed whispered warnings across the psychic network. The swarm converged on the Allied fleet like a tidal wave of chitin and screaming. Drones by the millions, their bodies semi-corporeal, their minds linked in perfect, terrible unison. The fleet fought back. Railguns fired, plasma cannons roared, Creel boarding parties launched themselves into the swarm, their fear transmuted into fury by Ilara's training. Humans and Creel died side by side, their blood mixing in the vacuum of space. But Ilara was not with the fleet. She was in a stealth shuttle, alone, flying directly into the hive's core, Reek had argued. The commanders had begged. Ilara had refused every escort, every backup, every safety measure. "The hive expects an army," she said. "It doesn't expect one woman with a knife. That's always been my advantage. I'm not going to stop using it now." The shuttle pierced the hive's outer membrane and entered a realm of pure nightmare. The core was not a planet. It was a mind, a vast pulsing organ of neural tissue that stretched for thousands of kilometers, its surface rippling with psychic energy. The moment Ilara stepped onto its surface, the hive spoke directly into her thoughts. "Little killer, we have been waiting." Ilara didn't answer. She walked forward, blade in hand, through corridors of living flesh that pulsed with stolen memories. She saw Viridian Station again, the cargo bay, the bodies, the children's transport exploding. She saw Thomas Reyes's face. She saw every face she had ever failed to save. The hive whispered, "You carry so much guilt, so much pain. We can take it from you. Join us. Become part of something greater. Never be alone again." "I was never alone," Ilara said. She kept walking. The hive tried harder. It showed her visions of peace, a quiet room, a warm bed, the absence of nightmares. It showed her Thomas alive, apologizing for leaving her. It showed her a version of herself that had never picked up the blade, that had died on Viridian Station with everyone else, that had never become the one who counts. Ilara paused. For a single terrible moment, she wanted it. She wanted the silence, the stillness, the end of counting. Then she thought of a 12-year-old girl's message. "I hope you have someone counting on you, too." She raised the blade. "I promised a child I wouldn't give up," she said. "I've broken a lot of promises. Not this one." She drove the blade into the hive's core. The scream that followed was not a sound, it was a force. It ripped through the psychic network, shattering the hive's connection to its drones. Millions of Xylos warriors collapsed in mid-attack, their minds severed from the source. The fleet watched in stunned silence as the swarm dissolved into inert biomass. Inside the core, Ilara hung onto the blade as the hive convulsed around her. The psychic backlash tore through her mind, shredding memories, twisting thoughts, showing her every death she had ever caused from the victims' perspectives. She saw the Creel champions, the pirates, the assassins, the soldier on Viridian Station whose throat she had opened with the very first swing of the blade. She saw their fear, their confusion, their final desperate thoughts, and she accepted it. "I did this," she whispered. "All of it. I'm not sorry. I'm not proud. I'm just here." The hive's final pulse hit her like a physical blow. She lost her grip on the blade, fell, tumbled through darkness for what felt like hours. Then hands caught her. Vrek's hands. He had followed her. Of course he had followed her. And now he pulled her from the collapsing core, dragged her back to the shuttle, strapped her into a crash couch as the autopilot engaged. "You're insane," he said, his voice cracking. "Probably," Ilara managed. She looked down at her hands. The blade was gone. Lost somewhere in the dying hive. She felt lighter than she had in 3 years. The aftermath was quiet. The Xylos hive was dead. The Creel Civil War ended, replaced by an uneasy alliance with humanity. The colonies rebuilt, The galaxy moved on as galaxies do. Ilara Vasquez retired. Not to a cargo container, to a small house on New Carthage, the colony she had saved. She grew vegetables. She adopted a cat. She slept through the night for the first time in 4 years. Freck visited often. He had become a diplomat, shuttling between Creel space and human space, building bridges from the wreckage of war. He always brought gifts, rare spices, old books, once a live chicken that escaped and terrorized the neighbors. She never picked up a blade again, but she kept the one from Viridian Station. A Creel salvage team had recovered it from the hive's corpse, the metal somehow unmarred, the edge still sharp. She mounted it on her wall, next to a picture of Private Thomas Reyes and a hand-drawn card from a 12-year-old girl named Mira. One night, years later, a Creel child came to her door. The child was small, scared, trembling. It spoke in broken galactic standard. "You are the one who counts." Ilara knelt to meet its eyes. "My name is Ilara, I know. But they said not to speak your name aloud." "Who said that?" The child hesitated. "The elders. They said you are a nightmare. They said you never miss." Ilara looked past the child. At the setting sun over New Carthage, at the garden she had planted with her own hands, at the cat rubbing against her ankle. "I've missed plenty," she said softly. "I missed saving my friends. I missed keeping my promises. I missed being human for a long time." She touched the child's shoulder. "But I didn't miss when it counted. And neither will you." The child stared at her. Then it hugged her, quick, fierce, and unexpected. When it left, it whispered, "Ilara," just her name. No fear. No trembling. She closed the door and leaned against it, tears streaming down her scarred cheeks. The blade hung on the wall behind her. The cat purred. The sun set, and for the first time in her life, Ilara Vasquez stopped counting. They built a statue of her on Krellis Prime, not on the sacred battle plane, but in a new square next to a hospital that treated humans and Creel side by side. The statue showed her kneeling, head bowed, blade laid across her knees. Not triumphant, not victorious. Just present. The inscription read, "She never missed." Not once, but more importantly, she never stopped trying to miss. That is what we should remember. Children asked why they whispered her name so softly. The elders said, "Because some legends are too loud to shout." And she taught us that true strength is not in never falling. It is in rising every time, blade in hand, and dancing one more dance. And somewhere in a small house on New Carthage, an old woman with silver scars and white hair smiled in her sleep, dreaming not of battle but of a garden, a cat, and a child who had dared to speak her name aloud.